Back in medieval times, mosquitoes were a real problem. Peasants had no sprays, no nets, and no easy ways to stop them. But they didn't just give up. They found different ways to fight back, even if it wasn't always pretty. Here's how they controlled mosquitoes. Life for medieval peasants wasn't exactly fresh and clean. Their homes were small, often one-room huts with dirt floors that turned to mud when it rained. These weren't emotional support chickens. They were just regular chickens who supported the family by occasionally laying eggs on your bed. Baths were rare, maybe once every few months, or for some, once a year. Medieval health advice was basically stay dirty, stay healthy, which explains why nobody was rushing to become a doctor back then. This lack of washing created a smell that would make your nose wrinkle today. Their clothes rarely got washed and absorbed months of sweat, cooking smoke, and dirt. If a medieval peasant walked into a modern mall, the place would clear out faster than when someone brings fish leftovers to the microwave at work. But here's the twist. This terrible smell actually helped them with mosquitoes. It's probably the only time in history when someone said, "Thank goodness I smell this bad," and actually meant it. The mix of old sweat, dirt, and skin oils created a scent that confused mosquito sensors. It didn't repel them completely, but it made peasants less attractive targets. Being stinky was basically medieval bug spray. Not what they were going for, but they'd take the win. Their diet made this natural defense even stronger. Medieval peasants ate lots of garlic, onions, and leeks. Their breath could kill a mosquito mid-flight, which was definitely not in the farming manual, but proved useful nonetheless. These foods contain sulfur compounds that come out through your skin when you sweat, and mosquitoes don't like these compounds. One study found that people who eat garlic regularly get about 18% fewer mosquito bites than those who don't. They weren't writing peer-reviewed papers titled "Garlic Breath, the Medieval Mosquito Defense System," but they knew what worked. Of course, there's a trade-off. While body odor kept away some mosquitoes, it attracted lice and fleas. Medieval peasants basically traded mosquito bites for tiny roommates that paid rent in itchiness. Children had it worse. Their sweeter body chemistry naturally attracts more mosquitoes than adults. Even today, kids get bitten up to 10 times more often than grown-ups. Parents would sometimes rub extra garlic on their kids' skin before sending them out to work. Nothing says, "I love you," like making your child smell like a walking pasta sauce. What's fascinating is that modern repellents use similar principles. We've gone from "hasn't bathed in 6 months" to "pleasant lemon scent," which is definitely progress. When the natural funk wasn't enough protection, medieval peasants turned to more active methods. When body odor and garlic sweat weren't enough protection, medieval peasants turned to smoke. They discovered that thick smoke drove mosquitoes out faster than anything else. Medieval homes had central fire pits with only a hole in the roof for smoke to escape. This poor design became an unexpected weapon against pests. The medieval home security system was basically either deal with the mosquitoes or slowly turn into smoked ham while you sleep. They burned whatever created thick smoke: damp leaves, green wood, and even animal dung. Northern Europeans used peat moss, while southern regions burned herbs like rosemary and lavender. Smoke worked because mosquitoes have sensitive breathing tubes that get irritated by smoke particles. It also disrupted the insect's ability to track humans by following our exhaled carbon dioxide. Workers built smudge fires around fields during evening work too, creating protective zones where people could gather without being swarmed. Dinner conversations went something like, "How's the stew?" Cough. "Delicious." Cough. "What?" Cough. "I said," cough. Cough. "Never mind." Modern research confirms smoke reduces mosquito activity by up to 70% in enclosed areas. The problem? Smoke isn't healthy for humans either. Medieval peasants suffered eye irritation, chronic coughing, and lung problems. The average person probably inhaled the equivalent of 20 cigarettes daily just by staying home. Some tried to limit exposure by timing it carefully, smoking out homes before bedtime, then letting it clear before sleeping. Others built raised sleeping platforms knowing smoke rises. In wetland areas, fires were kept smoldering all night, with family members taking turns adding fuel. The medieval version of mosquito control was basically choosing between being bitten or being bacon. While smoke deterred mosquitoes, it didn't eliminate them, and breathing smoke created its own problems. Some peasants began looking for a better solution. Medieval peasants gradually discovered a more effective strategy: change the environment itself. Through observation, they realized that mosquitoes disappeared during dry periods and multiplied after heavy rains. The connection between standing water and mosquito problems became clear. Many villages were built in low-lying areas near water sources, perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes. A single puddle the size of a dinner plate could produce hundreds of mosquitoes every week during warm months. Did medieval people understand mosquito biology? Not exactly. They didn't know about larvae or breeding cycles, but they noticed patterns, and that was enough to take action. They couldn't explain why mosquitoes emerged from stagnant water, but they knew that where water stood still, the biting insects followed. The simplest solution was drainage. Peasants dug small trenches to redirect standing water away from homes and gathering areas. These crude drainage systems weren't built with fancy tools. Most were dug using wooden shovels or even bare hands. Digging these ditches was hard work, especially in clay soils that dominated many European farming regions. If I had to dig trenches by hand while wearing shoes made of old cowhide, I'd probably just move into the woods and make peace with being eaten alive. The drainage networks grew more complex over time. Village elders could often map out the invisible web of small channels that directed water away from living spaces. During especially wet seasons, maintaining these ditches became a community priority, with families taking turns clearing blockages and extending channels. In areas where drainage was difficult, peasants would fill in low spots with rocks, broken pottery, wood scraps, and packed soil. The goal was to eliminate any place where water could collect for more than a few days. This fill-in method worked particularly well in village courtyards and paths where foot traffic would further compact the material over time. Water barrels presented another challenge. People needed to store rainwater, but open barrels were mosquito paradises. Some clever villagers covered water containers with thin cloth or placed a layer of dried herbs on the water surface. Others figured out that a thin film of cooking oil poured onto stored water prevented mosquitoes from breeding without making the water unusable. Here's a mind-blowing fact. A single female mosquito can lay up to 300 eggs at once, and those eggs can hatch in as little as 48 hours. One puddle left unattended could produce thousands of mosquitoes in a week. Medieval villages that neglected water management could face overwhelming swarms that made outdoor work nearly impossible. In many villages, children were assigned to check around homes for any collected water in discarded pots, tree stumps, or natural depressions. This simple practice is still recommended by health organizations today. Medieval kids probably complained about mosquito patrol duty, just like modern kids whine about taking out the trash. But why do I have to tip over the puddles? I did it last week. Some communities took environmental management further by modifying the landscape around their settlements. They might slightly raise the paths between houses or create gentle slopes in common areas to prevent water from pooling. In regions with consistent rainfall, shallow stone-lined gutters directed rainwater away from buildings and into nearby streams or designated drainage areas. Several medieval villages discovered that certain modifications to water sources helped reduce mosquito numbers. For instance, many communities learned to keep the edges of ponds clear of vegetation, which reduced sheltered areas where mosquitoes could lay eggs. Others ensured that community wells had tight-fitting covers and good drainage around the base. Some communities introduced certain fish to ponds and streams. These fish ate mosquito larvae, though medieval people didn't understand the exact mechanism. They just noticed fewer mosquitoes around ponds with these fish. In Mediterranean regions, small minnow-like fish were deliberately kept in water storage cisterns to keep them free of wriggling mosquito larvae. The location of livestock pens also played a role in mosquito management. Farm animals attract mosquitoes in large numbers, so keeping animal enclosures at the edge of settlements rather than scattered throughout could direct mosquito activity away from human dwellings. This knowledge led to more organized village layouts in some regions. Even medieval garden design inadvertently helped with mosquito control. Many herbs grown for cooking and medicine naturally repelled insects. When these plants were clustered around windows and doors, they provided a buffer zone that mosquitoes were reluctant to cross. By reducing breeding sites near their homes, medieval communities could decrease the local mosquito population by as much as 60%, without understanding the biology behind why it worked. As effective as environmental management was, peasants still needed extra protection, especially at dawn and dusk when these bloodsuckers were most active. They turned to another strategy. Beyond managing standing water, medieval peasants wielded another clever weapon against mosquitoes: plants. Through observation, they discovered that certain herbs and flowers seemed to keep the biting insects away. Medieval village gardens weren't pretty. They were practical growing spaces where plants served specific purposes. Among them were special herbs that doubled as living mosquito repellents. Lavender grew beside many cottage doors, its purple flowers adding rare color to an otherwise drab landscape. Its strong scent masks the human odors that attract mosquitoes. Medieval folk noticed fewer insects buzzed around when lavender was nearby, so they planted it near entrances, windows, and outdoor work areas. Mint earned its place in every garden for multiple reasons. Its pleasant taste made it valuable for cooking, but it also contains menthol, a compound mosquitoes hate. Crushed mint leaves rubbed on skin offered temporary protection from bites. Medieval mint wasn't the fancy peppermint in your chewing gum. This was wild mint that grew like a weed, which was perfect because medieval gardening skills were basically throw seeds and pray. Wormwood might be the most powerful mosquito repellent they had. This bitter herb produces a strong, musty odor that humans find unpleasant, but mosquitoes find unbearable. It was so effective that some villages had communal wormwood patches near gathering areas where people could break off a branch to wave around while sitting outdoors. Tansy, with its bright yellow button-like flowers, was another favorite. Its strong-smelling leaves contain natural compounds that confuse mosquitoes' hunting abilities. People planted tansy around doorways and windows, creating barriers that mosquitoes hesitated to cross. These plants weren't used individually, but in combinations that created a protective perimeter. A typical medieval cottage might have lavender and mint near the door, tansy by the windows, and wormwood along pathways. Quick fact, modern research shows that essential oils from these plants can reduce mosquito landings by up to 50%. Medieval peasants didn't have scientific studies, but generations of observation taught them what worked. Basil played a double role in gardens. While valued in cooking, it also helped keep insects away. Mosquitoes avoid this herb even more when it's slightly dried out, exactly the condition it often reached in poorly tended medieval gardens. Keeping the basil plant alive but slightly stressed was medieval gardening advice that basically describes most of my houseplants today. Marigolds stood out with their bright orange and yellow flowers. These weren't just decorative. Marigolds contain pyrethrum, a compound still used in modern insect repellents. Medieval gardeners noticed fewer mosquitoes around these cheerful flowers. During particularly bad mosquito outbreaks, people would sometimes stuff small cloth bags with dried mosquito-repelling herbs to wear around their necks or tie to bedposts. The effectiveness of these plant repellents varied widely depending on conditions. Fresh crushed leaves worked better than whole plants. And no single plant offered perfect protection. It was the combination that created a generally hostile environment for mosquitoes. While plants helped reduce mosquito numbers around homes, they couldn't prevent all bites, especially when peasants worked in fields far from their protective garden herbs. For those times, medieval people developed another strategy. When herbs weren't enough, medieval peasants turned to their final line of defense: clothing. Beach season in medieval Europe was less show off your tan and more cover every inch of skin or become mosquito dinner. This wasn't just about modesty. Many had learned through itchy experience that exposed skin meant more mosquito bites. During mosquito season, peasants adjusted their clothing specifically to minimize bites. The typical outfit included a loose linen shirt with long sleeves regardless of temperature. These shirts were woven from flax fibers, creating a light barrier that mosquitoes struggled to pierce. They invented layering before it was fashion, except their runway was a muddy village path, and their motivation was not getting eaten alive. Working in the fields on hot summer days while wearing long sleeves wasn't comfortable. Medieval workers would be drenched in sweat by midday. But the alternative, being covered in itchy, painful bites, was considered worse. The medieval peasant workout plan: wear 3 layers in August and try to outrun both heat stroke and mosquitoes. Medieval fashion choices boiled down to: would you rather be sweaty or become an all-you-can-eat buffet for mosquitoes? In the evening hours, when mosquitoes are most active, Additional layers came out. Women often wore head coverings that could be pulled forward to shield the face. Men sometimes wrapped strips of linen around exposed neck areas. These weren't fashion statements, they were practical protection from tiny flying vampires. For children, who tend to get bitten more frequently due to their sweeter body chemistry, special attention was paid to protective clothing. Many youngsters wore small hats with bits of netting or loose fabric hanging around the face to provide extra protection. Medieval kids looking like tiny beekeepers wasn't a fashion statement. It was pest control at its finest. Clothing thickness also mattered. Studies today show that mosquitoes can bite through fabrics as thick as 1.2 millimeters. Medieval peasants didn't measure with such precision, but they learned which garments offered better protection. Tightly woven linen provided decent protection, while loosely woven wool was less effective despite being thicker. Medieval laundry day took on new importance during mosquito season. The choice was washing your clothes or feeding the mosquitoes. Kinda puts my complaints about folding socks into perspective. Many peasants slept with thin face coverings or under simple bed canopies made from old linen during mosquito season. These early bed nets weren't fancy, often just a piece of fabric hung from the ceiling, but they improved sleep quality significantly. The first canopy beds weren't about luxury. They were about not waking up looking like a connect-the-dots puzzle, courtesy of mosquito bites. Some regions developed specialized clothing items specifically for mosquito protection. In particularly swampy areas, records show that evening headwear included loosely woven hats with wide brims. The brims kept insects at a distance from the face, while specific weaving patterns made them difficult for mosquitoes to land on. Gloves, which were typically a luxury item for the wealthy, became practical tools for evening work in mosquito-rich areas. Peasants created simplified versions using leftover fabric scraps. These weren't the elegant gloves of nobility, but rough hand coverings that prevented bites while still allowing for basic work. Color also played a surprising role in mosquito protection. Medieval people noticed that darker clothing seemed to attract more mosquitoes. This observation is supported by modern research showing that mosquitoes are indeed more attracted to dark colors, which stand out more against the horizon and retain body heat that mosquitoes can detect. Adjusting clothing for mosquito protection came with downsides. Extra layers in summer heat led to increased sweating and potential heat-related problems. But for most medieval peasants, the trade-off was worth it. Even now, I'd rather sweat like a boiled potato than get eaten alive by mosquitoes. Some things never change. While these clothing strategies helped reduce bites, medieval peasants also discovered that timing was everything. They began to notice patterns in when mosquitoes were most aggressive and adjusted their daily schedules accordingly. Medieval peasants might not have had fancy mosquito traps or bug zappers, but they did have one powerful tool against mosquitoes: observation. Over generations, they learned to notice patterns in when and where mosquito attacks were worst, and they adjusted their daily routines accordingly. The most important discovery medieval people made was that mosquitoes followed a fairly predictable daily schedule. Mosquitoes weren't equally active all day long. They had peak feeding times, and if you could avoid being outside during those times, you could significantly reduce your chances of being bitten. Dawn and dusk turned out to be the worst times for mosquito activity. The cooler temperatures and calmer winds during these transition periods created perfect conditions for mosquito feeding frenzies. Medieval farmers called these the biting hours and tried to schedule indoor work during these times whenever possible. Medieval parents would tell their kids, "Be home before the mosquitoes start hunting," which was basically the original curfew before anyone invented clocks. This timing knowledge became a critical part of daily planning. Summer harvest schedules were adjusted to keep workers in the fields during midday, when the hot sun and drier air naturally reduced mosquito activity. Yes, working under the midday sun was brutally hot, but it was better than fighting off swarms of hungry insects at dawn or dusk. Fun fact: female mosquitoes, the only ones that bite, are most active during dawn and dusk. Modern research shows mosquito activity can be up to 5 times higher during these periods compared to midday. Medieval peasants didn't know why this happened, but they definitely noticed the pattern. Meals were another activity that got rescheduled to avoid peak mosquito times. In many medieval villages, the evening meal was moved earlier during summer months to allow families to eat before the evening mosquito assault began. After sunset, people would quickly finish any necessary outdoor chores and retreat indoors to safety. Community gatherings followed similar timing rules. Village meetings, celebrations, and even religious festivities would be scheduled around mosquito activity. Wedding celebrations might start at midday rather than evening, and market days would begin after the morning mosquito rush had subsided. What time does the festival start? When the sun is high enough that the mosquitoes take a nap. Medieval time telling at its finest. Medieval people also learned that still, warm nights meant more mosquitoes, while windy, cooler evenings offered some relief. When a breeze picked up, families might seize the opportunity to spend some time outdoors. Windy days became prime time for activities that required extended periods outside, like washing clothes or preparing food for storage. Seasonal timing was also crucial. In temperate regions, mosquito activity followed predictable annual patterns. People knew that the first warm days after spring rains would trigger the first mosquito explosion of the year. Late summer, when water sources began to dry up, usually marked a decline in mosquito numbers. Villages located near wetlands developed even more sophisticated timing systems. They tracked water levels in nearby marshes and knew that a certain number of days after flooding or heavy rains, mosquito numbers would surge. This knowledge allowed them to prepare by gathering extra mosquito-repelling herbs or planning indoor activities for the worst days. The medieval mosquito forecast was basically looking ahead to Tuesday, chance of getting absolutely swarmed if you decide to hang laundry after 4 o'clock. Perhaps most importantly, medieval peasants shared their timing knowledge within communities. Experienced elders taught younger generations which times were safe and which times to stay indoors. This collective wisdom about mosquito patterns was passed down through families and became part of the standard knowledge that every child learned. Timing strategies might sound simple compared to modern mosquito control methods, but they were remarkably effective. By simply avoiding outdoor activity during peak mosquito hours, medieval people could reduce their bite exposure by up to 70%. Combined with their other strategies, body odor, smoke, water management, plants, and clothing, this timing knowledge gave medieval peasants a surprisingly effective mosquito defense system. If it meant fewer bites, I would have happily hauled water in the noon sun, even if I came back looking like a baked loaf of bread. All these strategies together, controlling standing water, using repellent plants, wearing protective clothing, and timing activities carefully, helped medieval peasants survive in a world where mosquitoes were more than just an annoyance. They were carriers of diseases that could devastate entire communities.